Як і всі підприємці, хотів збудувати систему, яка
Like all entrepreneurs, I wanted to build a system that operates in a more or less autonomous mode. I think only about 10% of top management was actually ready for the introduction of corporate governance.
Almost immediately after the board was created, a crisis hit.
For a certain period, we stopped making payments. For us, it was a matter of honor to lead the company out of these crises.
In 1 year of the board's work, all that profit increased fivefold.
Пані та панове, вітаю вас на каналі Ради директорів з Сергієм Булавіним.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the channel Board of Directors with Sergiy Bulavin. Today, our guests are Kateryna and Dmytro, my colleagues on boards of directors, and Volodymyr Rogoznyi. He is currently joining us online. Volodymyr is an entrepreneur, owner, and managing partner of a group of companies. In fact, we created our first board in our practice specifically in Volodymyr's companies at his request. Volodymyr, welcome.
Welcome, Volodya.
Hello?
Good afternoon.
В 19-му році ти прийняв рішення створювати...
In 2019, you made the decision to create a board of directors for your company, for your group of companies. How did the idea to create a board come about? And why specifically a board? Perhaps at that time you were considering bringing in consultants or some other forms.
як і всі підприємці, напевно, хотів...
Like all entrepreneurs, I probably wanted to build a system that operates in a more or less autonomous mode. I wanted it to be self-governing, self-developing. And when, in 2019, we reached the point where the structure had expanded into several business units and became quite complex, 115 people, I had to rethink, or rather, I had to reconsider the management function. And when I faced the fact that everything was going through me and it resembled a linear functional structure, like a military one, then self-management, autonomous functioning of the structure without me became, an impossible task for me. At that time, I was in the CEO club and met with Sergiy Bulavin. He told me about how Sigma Blazer is organized and from which angle you can approach introducing structure, manageability, and predictability into our management. Well, I liked this idea, so I gathered more materials, talked to other people who had already implemented corporate governance at that time, and started to put this idea into practice. For a company to be truly valuable, it must be able to function autonomously without its owners. That was exactly the problem I was trying to solve. I tried to make the management transparent, structured, and self-sustaining. And then Sergiy somehow introduced me to how things could be, what it might look like, and we implemented corporate governance.
Володимире, якщо брати 19 рік...
Volodymyr, if we look at 2019, the year when the idea of creating a board actually emerged and the first steps were taken to establish the board, do you think that you, personally as the owner, were ready to implement the board? And to what extent was the company and its top management ready?
Я до цього прагнув.
I was striving for this, but when it actually came time to implement it, the entire top management was skeptical about the idea. And my desire to structure management ran into distrust, into a kind of fear, like they're going to take away our authority, and what, if anything at all, will we get in return? So I think the top management was only about 10% ready for the introduction of corporate governance. We had to do a lot of promotional and explanatory work.
Так, і коли ми починали працювати...
Yes, when we started working on the board with Kateryna and Dmytro, we felt, probably Kateryna and Dmytro felt, a certain wariness and caution in communication so as not to say too much. To, in a way, yes, protect themselves, but later on this changed and things started working normally.
Я можу додати, тут, я думаю, важлива річ це...
I can add something here. I think an important point is the owner's awareness, Volodymyr. Your role was crucial for the implementation. Also, your principle of transparency and keeping everyone informed definitely played its part, not only in the beginning, but also later on, when every year we reported on the board's performance indicators, we saw the company's metrics, and each time we shared the plans for what the board would implement in the following year. I think that was important.
Борд яким чином надавав поради, як
The board would gently offer advice on how to improve certain aspects, and I believe that was a very gentle and proper way to get involved. Well, gentle, I'm not sure I would call it gentle. There were constant questions from top management, often sabotage that the board didn't see, and I had to handle it in my own way. That is, to step in as a leader and be more authoritarian. But one way or another, sooner or, well, not sooner, I'd say about 6 months later, the management realized the benefits. Management realized that their opinions were being heard, and a spirit of commitment began to emerge rather than resistance. That's roughly how it was.
Через деякий час після створення борду,
Sometime after the board was created, we, as the board, approached you, Volodymyr, as the business owner, to change the board's authority. You remember, colleagues, we created a certain format where, at first, we independently decided which authorities to request from Volodymyr, and then we initiated a conversation with Volodymyr to discuss these authorities. What was your attitude when the board, or by the way, the council that existed at that time, was requesting and demanding additional authority to continue its work?
Я був радий, що є з ким поділитися відповідальністю.
I was glad that there was someone to share responsibility with, someone from whom I could hear wise advice. There is an additional point of view, a sort of helicopter view on what is happening, because when you work inside your own business, you don't notice the details. And when someone from the outside looks at your business, compares it with other industries, with other ways of doing things, then your pool of options for making decisions, well, increases significantly. Moreover, not only you, but every manager has their own set of tools. And when the board proved that its advice really works, we started to add to give the board more and more authority. And the board's request, like, let's consider this new approach, give us the authority for, say, I don't know, additional issues. Well, I saw that as a positive thing, and I hope that management also saw it as positive.
Я хочу повернутися на етапі там ще створення ради.
I want to go back to the stage when the board was still being created. Well, you said that you talked with Sergiy Bulavin, he told you about it, and then you spoke with acquaintances and friends. And then the actual creation of the board, the composition, the selection of board members, if you can recall, how did that happen? How you and I, together with Sergiy, did all of this, right?
Так, це був суцільний фаворитизм, тому що
Yes, it was complete favoritism because I entrusted Sergiy to put together a puzzle of skills and personalities that could, by complementing each other and not arguing, cover most of the company's challenges that we were facing. The main thing is the strategizing process. The strategizing process itself needed to be put on rails in such a way that it would be ongoing and that from time to time updates and adjustments to the strategy would be made. The second aspect, which is also very important, is marketing. We constantly had to adapt to the market, and the skills of the board members helped us both in positioning, in developing new products, and in sales. In sales, this was especially interesting through communities by integrating the company and employees into communities of professionals that include both our clients and consumers. Kateryna helped us a lot to understand how to work with communities. There was also an IT component. We conducted an audit thanks to Dmytro and reviewed how our architecture was structured, what functions IT performs, and we improved them. So it was a set of skills. The board members represented a set of skills and knowledge from different fields, which covered 90% of our current needs. It was also very important that one of the components was our financial situation. That is, it was necessary to establish additional accounting aspects that we hadn't been keeping track of and to systematize them. In addition, at the peak, our business is seasonal. During certain seasons, we needed to get money from banks, that is either from investors or from private lenders. And for a certain period, we had to raise funds. So Sergiy managed things in such a way that we could have alternative sources of financing thanks to his connections and the board's approaches.
А я б хотіла ще додати до
And I would also like to add to the point when Volodymyr noted not only the function of arbitration, but also the tools that were involved. Because in order to assess prospects as well as activities, at that time we worked through not only different options, but together with the team we also conducted SWOT analyses, created strategic maps, and developed criteria for evaluating the CEO. We also developed policies and looked at budgeting and the key indicators that determine how the business is changing. And it seems to me that in many cases it wasn't just our perspective. Thanks to these tools, it also became clear to the company's top management which decision or direction was being chosen or what decision needed to be implemented next.
Так, абсолютно вірно. Критичним було
Yes, absolutely right. Implementing a succession policy and several other tools, which we added to our human capital management toolkit, thanks to the board, was critical. And I am grateful to the board for leading us to the understanding that we need to nurture successors and prepare to delegate authority. But at the time of training and handing over, it seemed like, well, that's it. You hand things over and go relax. That's not how it is. You end up with someone with whom you can discuss current issues and plan for the future on your level. That helped me a lot.
Але я хочу тебе спитати щодо стратегування, да?
Now, I want to ask you about strategizing, okay? All of us here, everyone at this meeting, we understand the importance of having a strategy, but what is your advice to other owners? Is strategy important? Is it important to have one? And if so, then why?
Я постійно стикався з тим, що
I constantly encountered the fact that the most common strategy among top management is opportunism. If there's an opportunity, we'll take it, and if there isn't, well, we'll just let things run as they are. My natural desire to build a long-lasting, strong, self-developing company constantly clashed with the fact that I always had to make decisions about where to allocate resources, because we are all limited in time. Most of us are probably limited in money, in other resources. We have a certain number of people, and for me, it was natural to plan how to use my resources to achieve my goals. And after taking an MBA course at Mohila Academy back in 2008, I started to approach planning very carefully. For the most part, long-term planning was always running through my mind. As for management, planning and strategizing happened in spurts. We would get together once a year and hold strategic sessions, and from the very beginning, this was done more out of necessity than out of genuine enthusiasm. That is, even now, I still sometimes have to push the top management to get them to regroup, refresh their perspective, and make plans for the next year. So I still have to occasionally step in as an authoritarian leader. But the board has established a rhythm for strategizing. It's not just an annual rhythm. It's also about making adjustments as we roll out and implement this strategy. So the very systematic approach we took, the rhythm, and the ability to adjust the strategy. These, in my opinion, really helped us a lot because there were situations where we had to react instantly. I believe that the company itself benefited from the fact that, with the help of the board, we introduced such a continuous process of strategizing. Why is this necessary? So, returning to the question, in order to achieve the goal you have set for yourself, and not just for a one-year horizon, but for 3, 4, or even 5 years, we were planning for 5 years.
Варто зазначити, можливо, що для нас
It's worth noting perhaps that for us, for the board, this was also a very responsible experience, and it was the first time for us, and we had to define our own tasks and distribute them over time. We had a planning horizon of at least 1 year, or even for our entire term of work. And then from one meeting, from one session to the next, we had a whole work plan. That is, we defined a plan for our activities, what indicators we would review, which issues would be brought up for discussion, and any additional matters. After that, there was always a follow-up. In other words, we determined what needed to be done before the next meeting. We also had activities outside of meetings with top management. The board would meet separately to discuss issues that either remained unresolved or were left out of the main discussion. And separately, we had a review of what each participant needed to accomplish, whether it was top management, the CEO, or us, the board members. And before each meeting, we would start by going over what needed to be done and what had actually been completed. And I think that when Volodymyr talked about systematization and regularity, this focus on evaluating who did what within what time frame and what the results were also had a significant impact on activity and development.
Ритм проведення рад мобілізує.
The rhythm of holding board meetings is mobilizing. I can see that this rhythm was even therapeutic. Every month, you get together and review the results, go over the financials, HR, marketing, sales. Every aspect of the company is examined. You prepare to assess and provide recommendations. All of this keeps the company in shape, keeps the management in shape. I can already see that without this management tool, the company's results can become highly unpredictable. When corporate governance is implemented, the company becomes more stable in terms of how decisions are made, and there are consistent tools to help predict outcomes. That is, you set a certain net profit target for yourself, and often we can actually hit that exact number by the end of the year. Our forecasting accuracy has greatly increased and improved. All of this is a set of conditions you've created in order to achieve the result.
Володимир, і майже відразу після створення борду
Volodymyr, almost immediately after the board was created, a crisis hit, right? The coronavirus, the pandemic, which had a significant impact on one of the businesses in the group. Could you tell us a bit about the impact the board had at that time on the company's operations during this crisis?
Так, на момент створення борду.
Yes. At the time the board was created, the pandemic was just beginning, and within the group of companies, there was a business that started losing clients significantly because of the panic among customers in the market. And the business model we had implemented was built around offline events. NSBM essentially serves a marketing function for pharmaceutical, agrochemical, seed, and IT companies. There's a range of industries where NSBM has a strong market presence. So with the pandemic, events started shifting online, and it became necessary to restructure the business model. And it was precisely at that moment that the business needed to be reinvented, and having the board, the tools to analyze which business models would work, to look at which trends would dominate under the new conditions and circumstances and what to focus on, the board helped us to restructure both our business model and our approaches. That's why I believe the board did an excellent job. This business was set up in such a way that clients paid with a delay. That is, we have always maintained and still maintain large reserves of working capital. At the moment when the crisis hit, we needed to preserve this money and then, put it back into circulation. The crisis lasted a long time, and we gradually spent part of our working capital to support the team and to adjust our business model. When we were coming out of the crisis, we needed to replenish our working capital, and the board helped with that.
Володя, а от це така перша велика криза пандемії, і друга.
Volodya, well, the first big crisis was the pandemic, and the second, of course, was the start of the full-scale invasion. What were your expectations? Did you have any expectations about what the board should do, what it actually did, and did those expectations match how the board actually performed?
Просто з початком повномасштабного вторгнення.
Right before the start of the full-scale invasion, we had developed a new strategy for expansion into several markets, together with the board for several countries, and the board itself demonstrated an interesting quality, self-criticism. The board members said, we actually don't have direct experience with expanding into other markets. Let's bring in new board members from the countries you're planning to enter. And it was very gratifying to see such a high level of self-criticism. But as soon as we started looking at these new markets and considering a new composition, the full-scale invasion began. And the board, despite the fact that I think they already had other further plans, helped us understand where we stood, what resources we could use just to survive the initial shock, and from the very first minutes to reorganize our work in a way that would allow us to withstand the onslaught. First and foremost, the psychological onslaught, because the confusion among management and the team was overwhelming, especially in those first days. and we needed to come up with some kind of strategy for what to do next. So the board gathered and set up regular meetings. If I'm not mistaken, we met almost every 3 days at first and then nearly every week. This was done in order to stabilize and readjust our work. So we somehow, actually not just somehow, but we managed to maintain control and keep things running smoothly. In other words, the board helped us withstand the blow, readjust and develop a new strategy, which included elements like new business models and new markets. And I'm not sure that if I had handled this alone, just me and my team, I would have been able to readjust the company so effectively. That's why I believe it had a very positive stabilizing effect on the one hand, and on the other, it highlighted the available options and provided support. That's why I'm very grateful to the board, because at such a moment, your support and advice really helped us.
Мені здається, в цей час також вибудувалась певна довіра, тому що
I think that during this time, a certain level of trust was also built. Because both the pandemic crisis and the war crisis were truly shocking, and it wasn't easy for us to readjust our operations. For a certain period, we gave up compensation and payment precisely during these crisis times, understanding how difficult it was for the company, and for us, it was a matter of honor, I would say, to continue this and lead the company out of these crises. So thank you for not losing trust on your side either, and that we were able to do this together.
Yes, thank you.
Володимире, дуже дякую теж за таку оцінку. Дуже
Volodymyr, thank you very much as well for such an assessment. It's very nice to hear that. Indeed, we tried to create the maximum added value for your business. But here's a question. Well, we've just heard a lot of pleasant things, but in reality, there were probably some other less pleasant aspects, maybe related to certain nuances in communication or some hidden pitfalls. Were any of these related to the work of the board?
Важко було прийняти те, що хтось інший.
It was hard to accept that someone else starts to delve into your business and points out your shortcomings or the cycles you fall into. Of course, looking into a mirror that doesn't lie to you, and that's exactly what the board is, was a shock at first. And you've told yourself that your business is the best, right? It's almost perfect. But when someone shows you highlights that there are areas for improvement here and so on. So I'm not sure that every business owner is ready to look in the mirror without lying to themselves. And the main experience here is to look at yourself, at your company, without distorting it through your own imagination. This was rather unusual, I'd say, even uncomfortable. But that was the only real barrier for me personally, the only thing I had to overcome, accepting someone else's point of view as one of the possible options, and then adapting and adjusting my work accordingly. I have nothing to complain about. In our year of working with the board, our profits increased fivefold because the board reviewed the expenses, reviewed the costs, improved efficiency. So I think it's wonderful to have such a perspective, even if it's unpleasant at first. It's definitely beneficial, at least for net profit. So I don't see any obstacles except for working on oneself that could prevent the implementation of a board. In the end, it pays off through development, personal development of top management, financial growth, company capitalization and stabilization. That's why I'm such a fan of the board.
Супер. Ну і напевно це дуже важлива частина готовності власника для створення.
Super. And probably this is a very important part of the owner's readiness to create a board. If he is willing to listen to other opinions and perhaps from time to time hear some critical assessments of decisions that have been made and need to be adjusted and transformed into something else. Volodymyr, if you were to give advice to other business owners, would you recommend creating boards?
Так, я однозначно порадив би створювати ради, але
Yes, I would definitely recommend creating boards, but starting from a certain level of maturity. It's not a cheap endeavor at all, but at the very least, you can imagine the result and envision yourself achieving it. All the costs associated with implementation, both moral and material, pay off. And I believe that without a board, a company hits a plateau. That is, a company has a certain capacity to maintain a certain volume. But we had already reached such a plateau after which we had two paths. Either we would gradually, by continuing to exploit the existing business model and management approach, slide downward, or we would move upward. So, of course, the advice for oneself would be, the advice to the owner would be this: decide whether you are ready to look at yourself from a three-dimensional perspective, to accept advice from others that will truly be aimed at improving your business. After that, reorganize the management so that it perceives the board as a tool that helps withstand the entire onslaught of criticism. Why do we need this board? It only gets in our way. After that, you will probably have to negotiate with the team to ensure that the board's decisions are implemented. And after maybe a year, I think, of the board working steadily, things will start to get easier, in my opinion, because the autonomy of management processes will increase. Responsibility will be shared between the board and the owner, and a lot of safeguards will be put in place for, well, I wouldn't say to protect against stupidity, but rather to prevent the owner from making any sudden moves that could be harmful. So, in my opinion, you need to come to an agreement with yourself about what you want as an owner, and then weighing the pros and cons, decide whether you actually need a board.
Ти згадав, готовність чи неготовність власників. You mentioned, well, the readiness or lack of readiness of owners. If you look at Ukrainian private businesses, not many of them actually have boards. Why do you think that is? Is it mostly because, well, they're really not ready, or is it that they just don't know about it, or is there some other reason? Maybe they're just unaware that such a tool as a board exists, for example, or something else.
Я думаю, що нерозуміння.
I think it's a lack of understanding, not knowing why such a tool is needed or how it can be useful. That's what holds back the transition to this kind of corporate governance when boards are created. In my opinion, it's due to not knowing the consequences and an unwillingness to change anything. That's just how it works. If probably through business, schools, associations, and educational events, the advantages and, yes, some drawbacks of transitioning to corporate governance were communicated to the community of founders, I think there will be a lot more people willing to follow this path.
Тобто популяризація ідеї впровадження рад в бізнесі.
So the popularization of the idea of implementing a board in business should draw attention to this tool, including thanks to Volodymyr, our interview, which will be watched by other owners who might even know you personally. If they have any questions, they will reach out to you directly. Or perhaps those who don't know you will reach out through the YouTube channel where we will post this video in order to ask you something directly as an owner.
I'd be happy to answer and help.
Володимире, а ви сам готові?
Volodymyr, are you yourself ready to join the board of another Ukrainian business? Have you thought about it?
Так, думав про це, просто контекст змінився трохи.
Yes, I have thought about it. It's just that the context has changed a bit. I'm currently in the US, and continuing the strategy we developed together, expansion into other markets has become the main strategic direction that needs to be implemented. And I remember that I had a negative experience when we entered a country's market without being physically present there. So at first I went to Poland, and we also traveled to many other European countries. Nesfat, as the flagship, we chose Nesfat for expansion. Obviously, Nesfat is a more international product, and now here there is this challenge with the USA, but I hope it will work out because that's the market where most of our clients' interests come from. So here I am developing the business. I'm not sure how I can be useful to Ukrainian companies, probably only to those who are trying to enter the US market, maybe, but I don't really have, the experience to say, I've definitely entered the market. Look, here are the sales numbers. As for the European market, probably Artem and Alexander Yefimenkov, they have more grounds to say. We know how to expand Ukrainian business. I can tell you in detail about how we rolled the snowball together with them while we were in Warsaw and how this experience extended across various parts of Europe as well. However, despite my efforts, I haven't managed to achieve any similar success in the United States yet.
Однозначно це буде.
That will definitely happen.
I can help.
We are confident that it will happen, so I am absolutely sure that what you are doing will lead to success. And that's what we wish for you.
Володимире, колеги, дуже дякую за...
Volodymyr, colleagues, thank you very much for a very interesting conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being with us. See you again on the Board of Directors channel with Sergiy Bulavin.